All right, so let's talk about a few news things while we're waiting for people to get here. This I thought is pretty fun. This kind of thing happens a lot in political campaigns. So Trump made an ad to support the troops, but this is a Russian rifle and those are Russian planes. So that's probably a little more exactly honest than they intended to be. Anyway, this one's another pretty fun one. They were selling this, which I think is an electric truck. And they advertised it as having like 100 horsepower and said it's all ready to go. It's their prototype. And then they admitted that it never worked at all. The engine didn't work at all. They towed it up and they tilted the camera so it's not as obvious as it could be it's rolling downhill. And then they posted that video to get people to invest in it. And they never actually got it working at all. And they're trying to say this is perfectly legal because their documentation they said it was fully functional, but they never said it was running under its own power. So you see a lot of these scams out there. There's an idea here, which does sound pretty good, that if you wear a face mask and you get exposed to the coronavirus, you get a small dose of it. And apparently the people that get only a little bit sick, like no symptoms at all, are the ones that get a small dose. So in fact, if enough people wear masks, they say there is a dose at which you actually get some immunity from the small dose, but you don't have any symptoms. So in a way, it might be a little bit like a vaccine that way. In fact, that's I think what they call inoculation. Before there was vaccination, there was inoculation. They would take people with smallpox and they would get a little bit of blood out of like one of the sores they had from smallpox and inject other people so they get a small dose of it. It was not as good as a vaccine, but it was considered somewhat effective at reducing the number of people that got sick. And here's someone, you finally get somebody telling the truth because as you know, our president just lies all the time about everything. But this is much more like it. I mean, some of my friends are saying, boy, I can't wait till this lockdown is over. And I'm like, you gotta plan for a long time. And this guy's talking more like it. And this is from the company that manufactures the vaccines. And this is what they said. I mean, we won't even have a vaccine. We won't even have the formula for a vaccine until the middle of next year or something, in the best case. And manufacturing enough doses to reach the whole world will take a long time. Of course, a rich country like America will probably be at the front of the line. So realistically, sometime around the end of next year, a vaccine will be widely available. And then by all accounts, less than half of Americans will take it, and it will only be 50% effective. So it won't end the lockdown at all. So we'll see. However, the thing that would end the lockdown is actually enforcing social distancing and masks and having another real lockdown enforced where everyone goes along with it. And I'm thinking, you know, if Biden wins, he may be able to accomplish that, but he may not be able to because the politics might be so poisoned that a large bunch of Americans will refuse to participate in the lockdown. Sleep in the bed where they died, they say. I don't know. Anyway, yeah. Anyway, so another Russian dissident, or another assassination technique. This is Putin's standard way of dealing with his political enemies, and Trump very much wants to lock them up. He's still trying to lock up Hillary, which is part of what's so great about Trump. I mean, he would love to be Putin, but he is too insane to be Putin. He's too impractical. He's too petty. He spends his time trying to fight battles that are over. Like he gives to his talks and he talks about Hillary. Who cares about Hillary? Hillary's over. But he doesn't let go of things. So anyway, but this made me feel better because I've been thinking that Putin will just kill Biden or poison him. But I'm noticing the real pattern. Putin only poisons people that are a risk to him in Russia, a real risk to him directly. And I think what's going on is even for a complete oligarch like Putin, it is expensive to just poison and kill people. The fact is you take a risk, some people get mad, there may be sanctions put on your country or something. You can't just do it too much everywhere. He is not afraid of doing it to Russians that go to other countries. But I don't think he would kill a presidential candidate in America. I think it would be the consequences would be too severe. Anyway, Kanye is a Trump agent. He was Trump's best friend. And so what they've done, he's a Trojan horse. He's got Republican. He meets with the Trump campaign frequently. They're totally guiding him. His whole campaign is completely fake to spoil Biden. So he's been getting help from GOP operatives to get on the ballot and such, and they're trying to get in the ballot on the crucial swing states, just hoping he'll steal a few percentage of votes away from Biden. Because, of course, Biden won the primary by getting the black vote, and probably the Republicans think that black people will vote for Kanye. I don't think so, because the black voters are actually very sophisticated in America. But I don't think the GOP knows that, because their whole brand is racism and hating black people and underestimating them. Anyway, which it didn't used to be. That was entirely due to Nixon. Originally, the Republicans were supporting black people with Abraham Lincoln, and then Richard Nixon turned them against them to win. And then George Bush Sr. and Jr. tried to turn them back to being friendly to minorities again, and Trump totally bounced them back. So they've gone back and forth. The founders of the environmental movement have said, don't vote for the Green Party. The Green Party also is effectively a spoiler that just causes Republicans to get in by siphoning off a few percent of the liberal vote. And they've said, don't vote for any third party, vote for Biden. We have to get rid of Trump, because even on the environment, Trump is a disaster, of course, just like practically every other issue. He came to California today to tell our governor that there is no global warming. You're just making it up. The whole world is just going to cool, just like he says about the coronavirus. He is a curious psychological problem with this guy. He thinks he can just lie all the time. He thinks it's right for him to lie all the time. He thinks it's perfectly fine to admit on the record to a journalist that he knows the virus is bad, and then walk right out and tell everybody there's no virus, it's all fine, it's all fake. I think, and this is what his niece, Mary, said about him. She said, you don't understand what a broken person he is. He thinks that all he has to do is say whatever you want to hear right now to get through the next 5 minutes, and that's all he ever thinks of. He doesn't care whether it's true or false. He just sort of says whatever it looks like people want to hear, which is why I think he's so addicted to live performance. He has to have a real rally with people out there cheering, because he just reads the crowd and says whatever they want to hear. It's not that different than stand-up comedy. And he's completely unaware of the seriousness of his decisions. He's broken in a strange way. He only thinks about the short-term benefit of having people cheer for him right now. Something like that. I'm sure we'll have many PhD theses written on analyzing the psychology of this guy. And I think the much more interesting issue is the psychology of the people that support him. There's 40% of Americans are hypnotized by this guy and will just let him do everything wrong and kill us. It is troubling. Anyway, yes, here he is going to the rally. And he had this indoor rally, which was completely illegal. And so what he's done, this is what all previous presidents have done. If there's something, if some people are like protesting in the street and that's technically illegal, then somebody like Biden will try to set a good example by wearing masks and having social distancing and not having big rallies. But Trump will say, oh, well, they're breaking the law, so I can break the law too. I'm calling it a peaceful protest. We'll just have our big rally, because he doesn't understand that you would like to actually encourage good behavior. He just thinks of getting away with whatever he can get away with. He thinks like a crook, thinks like a mob boss. And somehow his followers can't see it. Anyway, so, and here's more of this stuff. I mean, he wants to, he had a big speech in favor of police brutality. He wanted to have spikes on the wall to kill people, and he wants the cops to just go kill anybody. If somebody shot some cops, he said, well, they should just go kill them. There's no point bothering having trials or anything. He'd like to be Duterte, just legalizing citizens killing each other. This is also a very common autocratic thing. They love violence. They love to see people getting hurt and bleeding. It's fun for them. It somehow makes them feel more powerful or something to get people to kill each other. And he liked that 17-year-old that just got a rifle and went to where the protests were happening to shoot people. And I think, he hasn't read enough history or to start having Hitler Youth. But if he gets another 4 years, he might get down to having Hitler Youth, teenage mobs. Trump was marching around with rifles, enforcing that you must praise the leader or we'll shoot you, sort of like what the Taliban does. It's a common failing. Anyway, so they're really messing with the voting. They messed with the voting in Milwaukee, in Wisconsin. They totally decided to add the Green Party about a month late, when they were, and then say they have to reprint all the ballots so they can't possibly get them out on time. And that's how they prevent voting here. And then they sent a national bunch of election mailings to everybody full of false statements about how to get your ballot. So they're getting sued in Colorado for it, and they say this is just appalling. The federal government sent everybody a list of instructions that are wrong, so they'll have trouble voting. And Trump said that if people could vote by mail, the Democrats should win, and so we're going to prevent that. And he appointed this guy DeJoy to destroy the post office to prevent it from happening, and it's happening. So anyway, this is all very much like what Putin does, where you have a fake election, but you carefully rigged it so that only the right guy can win. So we'll see if the next vote is probably the most free and fair we're going to have in a long time, unless we get rid of Trump. So anyway, here we are. This is 152. And I should mention tomorrow is IBM Z Day. I think you can still sign up. They're going to show us how to run IBM servers, IBM mainframes in particular. And I've been working on COBOL and other such mainframe stuff for a while. So I'm very interested. I'll be here. If you go to this thing, it's worth extra credit. They have a bunch of hands-on training and such. So if you're interested in that, it's not directly related to what we're doing here, but mainframes are very important, and I have an interest in them. Another thing you might want to do is Flare-On. Flare-On is down here. This is a capture the flag contest that goes on for 6 weeks. It is very, very difficult, and it's focused primarily on malware analysis. And I'll talk more about it tomorrow night in the malware analysis class. But I've learned a lot from this, although it is so difficult. There are 11 challenges, and I don't think I ever got more than 2 or 3 of them solved, but I learned a lot just from doing them. So anyway, that's from FireEye, which wrote the book we're using in this class and the book I'm using in the malware analysis class. So we're here. This is incident response. And so I'm going to talk about the chapters 4 and 5 about how to investigate an incident. And then I'm going to demonstrate some networking projects tonight because it comes up in this lecture, and it'd be good to show you that networking stuff. If you don't already know your networking, you should do some of these projects to get more practice at analyzing and understanding network traffic. So when you have an incident, then you need to collect some initial facts. First, you have some kind of report, like somebody reports a virus alert went off or something. And so you need to collect information, something specific that will help you do further analysis. Things like times, IP addresses, and you also verify that the facts are correct, because a lot of people think they've been hacked when they haven't. They misunderstand normal computer errors with attacks and such. One big issue at a large company is the time zones. You have servers all over the place, you have cloud providers all over the place, and the best recommended procedure is to use universal time for everything. That's what it's for. Don't even have local time on anything. All right, so you have checklists. You have an incident summary, how it was detected, the details of all the systems, and the network information, and the information about the malware you find. Not every attack involves malware, but much of it does. So you have to have documentation of all this stuff. Now, if you don't have an organized incident response plan, you just keep notes somewhere, but after a while you should have some kind of like internal wiki or trouble ticket system where you have some way of recording it so it can be referred to later, and it can be shared with all the people on your team, but it can't be part of the target's network, because the target is, of course, compromised. Somebody is doing bad things on your target, and so you shouldn't have any of your incident response stuff on the target. All right, so here's the summary. When it was reported, who all the people were involved, who the people that reported it, detected it, who recorded this information. So you can go back to all these people and get more information from them, or get them to testify in court, or all the things that may happen. So you have a description of the incident, the resource affected, how it was detected, with information about what the original clue was that something bad was happening, and then unique identifiers of the computers and devices, and some idea of who's been using the machine, who's aware of it, is it still going, and how confidential it all is. And then you got your incident detection. So you want to find out what process detected it and what sources provided that, and then you want to consider whether the data is accurate, because there all kinds of security products, the people have a lot of false positives. A lot of people think some kind of attack is underway when it's not. And a lot of your intrusion detection systems and antivirus and everything also have false positives where they report innocent events as attacks when they aren't. So you have to be careful about this. And you probably want to preserve the source data if it's convenient. So then you have your incident detection. You know, how long have the detection sources been in operation? If you have something running like an intrusion detection system and it's been running for a year and you've got it all tuned up and you trust it, then you might believe it. But if it's something somebody just installed that just said you had an attack, it's very likely to just be some kind of mistake. All right, another option though is it might be that your newly installed thing is detecting a problem you've had all along. This happened at Lawrence Livermore National Lab, the military lab. I went to a presentation there, and they were inventing the product Bro, which is now called Zeek, and it's in this class. And it was the new, very advanced intrusion detection system, essentially. And when they installed it, it detected that their servers were had been compromised and were being used by criminals and had been being used by criminals for 6 months. And they had infected their Linux servers and they'd stolen their credentials so they could make crosswise connections to other Linux servers and steal their credentials and other Linux servers. And they said these guys have had root on practically every major Linux server in the world this way. And they've had it for 6 months and nobody ever detected them until we developed this new system that was able to detect it. So that's another issue. Things like the IDS typically targets. I haven't heard of that. Of course, it would be good to turn that off. I know antivirus on a host system is frequently a target. There's a lot of attacks that shut down the antivirus. Bringing down an enterprise class IDS is something I've not heard of anybody doing because it's not practical. I mean, it's pretty easy to make a system that cannot be attacked. For example, when you connect it, you should connect it on layer 2 so your detection device does not even have an IP address. It gets an extra copy of the packets at the switch level, and that means you cannot even address it directly. So even if you were to infect it with a reverse shell, it could not phone home to the server because it doesn't have an IP address. And so there are very simple techniques like that that make it extremely difficult to detect an IDS and to shut it down and to even scan it to find out what version it is or anything. Yeah. So like a mirror or a span port, that kind of thing. So if you do that, it's very difficult to attack the IDS itself. I suppose it must have happened sometimes, but in general, that's not practical. And that's why a properly configured IDS or a properly configured network monitoring device is extremely useful. But there are host-based IDS actually running on a server, of course, that can be pretty easily attacked and brought down and the logs erased and such, which is why you should always be forwarding the logs to a central log collector like Splunk, which should be set up so that you cannot delete the data off it. All right. And so you got individual systems, and of course you have to have a complete identifier of what the system is and the people involved and IP addresses and host names and so on, and what kind of information is stored on it, because now you know how to analyze network traffic and you know if it is now a target. You know, if people are going to be taking data off it, what data you should be looking for, traveling over the network. And on your individual systems, if you're still connected to the network, you want to have the history of malware, because you almost always detect an incident late in the process. The bad guys get in, they start doing things, they get away with stuff, they take over system after system, infect system after system, and they do that for quite a while before you catch them typically. So you generally only detect an attack late in the process, and therefore you need to ask, let's look back in time and across the network and find out all the steps that happened before this one I've detected. All right. And so then you got network traffic that you're looking at. You've got to have, of course, it's extremely valuable if you can identify malicious IPs that are using as command and control server, as staging servers from malware and exploit kits. And then it's very easy to tell if you've got more network traffic going out to them. And so you should be preserving your network data, and you need to know your network diagram and the traffic flow patterns, what's allowed and what isn't allowed, as we were talking about last time with that Splunk challenge. where you get the traffic that goes the wrong way because you know what the allowed way is in the network, and you notice traffic that's going against the legal way to go. And then your malware, of course. Malware is, you see these all the time on Twitter and in VirusTotal, and I see them constantly. Reports a new attack is underway, and you'll see information about the malware. So you have how it was detected, where it was found, file names, directories, and what it does. And of course, you would like to develop indicators of compromise, which we'll talk much more about later. All right. So you want to keep a copy of the malware if you can, and then start analyzing it. That's one of the jobs, figuring out what the malware does, and therefore finding a way to detect it and to clean it off. So you're keeping notes of everything, and remember that whatever you put in notes, those may end up in court. This happened to me. I was working on a case, and I was making sort of jokey comments in the side, and then that went to court, and the bosses were not happy with me. You have to be like dry and professional. I was unaware of the fact that my notes would end up in court. So here's the kind of example of attack timeline. The actual, so here's when person edited it. So this guy opened an infected email. Now the machine had a prefetch file created in the prefetch folder showing something was run. And oh, how much experience did I have at the time? Well, I was very new. I was just a new database analyst. And so I was quite new, that's why. And I didn't even realize that my job should be considered as computer forensics or anything. I was just thinking of myself as a tech. But as I moved into the world of forensics and dealing with legal issues and lawsuits, then my stuff was, I had a whole new level of responsibility that was new to me. So, you know, that's how you grow. This is a very common issue, by the way, with security people. They turn out as sort of just childish hackers playing games, cheating on games, hacking systems, going to DEF CON, pulling out stunts. And then when they get a real job and get responsibility and they start having things go to court and be examined by management, they have to sort of grow up and stop doing punkish, childish things. And I had to go through that too. So anyway, you record the instance, you record, here's the prefetch folder, which I think I've got in the projects where you get to see what executables have been run on that machine recently. And so then they figured it out and they collected live response data from that machine, which is typically what you would do. You don't want to bother collecting all the data, but you run some kind of script that fetches, you know, running processes and network connections and registry keys and such. So you have your typical priorities are possibly who broke in, although a lot of people, you don't even really care who, but mostly you really want to know what they got. Are they still in there? And more enough information to get rid of them. Although an increasing number of people are now paying for threat analysis to give you information about who the attackers probably are as part of defending yourself. But that is a secondary issue. I mean, most of us really don't care who got in, just want to kick them out. So you have, if you have account, you might get a list of account numbers, dates, and other information. If you have a personally identifiable information, and you might have legal consequences. And if you have payment card information lost, of course, then you got PCI DSS issues. So there are certainly, and if you're health records, there are special rules and regulations. So, you know, the nature of the business determines what the immediate priorities would be. And then you have to deal with management. Of course, management would like to say, make the network secure so nobody gets in. And you have to say, well, you can't have that. Nobody has that. The NSA doesn't have that. Google doesn't have that. That's what everybody wants, but you can't buy that at any price. So you're going to have to understand that people are going to get in sometimes, and we're going to have to respond to it. And so it's just like your employees stealing stuff from the company. You cannot get that down to zero. You just try to get it down to an acceptable level. So you, another issue, of course, is that attackers typically come in through foreign countries, and they often bounce off several servers, so you can't really tell where they came from, and you probably can't find them and prosecute them. And of course, if you don't detect it for months, and the average amount of time it takes to detect a network intrusion is something like 9 months or more, then a lot of the data you wish you had is probably gone. You probably don't retain logs that long. See, if attribution is where they want to identify people, yeah. Well, yeah, the reason why an attribution is typically skipped, this is really important. For most companies, Like City College, for example. City College gets hacked now and then. Sometimes they go on a server, somebody's got attacked or putting like extra files on the web server or something. All you want to do is clean them off. You typically, now you're going to try and figure out how they got in and patch the hole and clean up the page and make sure they didn't delete things and stuff like that. That's what you're working on. And trying to figure out where they came from and who they are is really a waste of your time. That's for the cops. That's going outside your company, perhaps outside the country, sending court orders to ISPs and getting logs and getting information from email servers and all that jazz. That's what you got to do, a real police investigation. And why would your company do that? You're probably not trained for that. And how does it benefit you? It does, because if somebody came in and hacked you, that means you have a weakness, and somebody else is going to find that weakness and come in and attack you. So, it doesn't really benefit you to hunt down that one criminal and lock them up 3 years later, 5 years later. What benefits you is to improve your defenses to stop everybody. That's why, normally it is not of any benefit for your company to waste much time on trying to figure out who attacked you. That's why. The only exception for that is people tied to governments or military or police, typically, because they might actually be interested in punishing the bad guy. The rest of us, this is why a lot of red teamers and hackers and pen testers and bug bounty people say, you shouldn't get mad at me for hacking in. You should be grateful because I helped you find your weakness. And now you can fix your weakness. That's usually the case. Usually punishing the particular individual that attacked you is really of no great benefit to you. Anyway, all right. By the way, there's another issue, of course. If you do want to punish the person who attacked you, then you can't do it yourself. You have to give it to the police and get the police involved. And typically, you would rather not make it public. You would rather not have the police come in and analyze your company network and discover possibly bad things you're doing, leak out your data. It's involving some external agency, like a law enforcement agency, in your company's problems is a really drastic step. And it can lead to unpleasant consequences. It's usually much better to handle it yourself, where you control everything and you can avoid having a lot of negative consequences. This is why everyone is so amazed by Trump, what he did this week. He invited Woodward in. He went on tape and told Woodward all this stuff that really he didn't want to have public. Like he even started bragging about classified nuclear weapons with Woodward, who was going to put it in a book and publish it, and admitted that he was lying about the virus. And everyone's like, what were you thinking? I mean, didn't you know that just leaking out confidential information would have undesired consequences later? And apparently he didn't know that. Anyway, so here's a case. Someone ran an automated vulnerability scanner. The kind of thing I was just talking about might have happened usually to City College. They run an automatic vuln scanner. They find some vulnerability. They come in and then they do something like put extra files on your server and use it to distribute porn or stolen files. And so management might be angry and want to prosecute the attacker. But typically, your security staff will tell you it is not worth the bother finding this one guy. All you have to do is protect your network, and that's going to actually accomplish more good for the company than wasting your time trying to hunt down the attacker. I had this happen at the college. We had a lab, and there was a lot of students using the lab coming in and out, and then we got a report, DMCA takedown notice. Somebody was downloading movies, Harry Potter movies or something, at the college. They said, somebody's downloading movies on your network and you've got to stop them. And they tracked down the IP address to one of our labs. And I went in the lab and I found one of the machines that somebody had been downloading movies on. And then one of the other teachers or administrators came and said, I know which student it is. It's that student there. They're like making trouble in class. I know it's them. And I say, don't go there. You don't know it's them. You just pick somebody you don't like. You blame it on them. We'll never prove it's them. We don't have a camera in the room. We don't really know who it was. I said, don't even waste your time trying to figure out who it is. I'm going to adjust the permissions on the servers, on the machines, so they can't do it again. And that's all we can realistically do. That's what we did. I readjusted the account permissions in there so they couldn't do that anymore, and it stopped. And that is usually what you do. That is the professional way to deal with such a thing, is decide what you can really accomplish and what's worth doing, and don't waste your time being angry and trying to punish somebody just because you're mad. You want to get your emotions out of it, and consider what's really worth doing. All right, good. All right, someplace. There it is. This is 152. All right. Well, yeah, that's what happens. That professor out for blood. A lot of people just get mad. It can happen. You get mad at a student because they're cheating or disrupting a class or something. It's an occupational hazard. There's a certain amount of immaturity and misbehavior, and it does get under your skin sometimes. But you can't let that control you. It's unprofessional and counterproductive. All right, so it looks like we got about everybody. I'll give it a few more seconds. All right. All right, which one of these is a false statement? Yeah, of course, that's rare. People usually don't have an insider. All right. It's not impossible. I've seen cases like that, but they are rare. All right, which one is not normally performed on individual systems? Yep, this happened at City College. That's why I put this here. We had a crazy network administrator, a chief technology officer, and he decided to create a fake virus emergency by staging a fake outbreak on the network. And so he went to the Chronicle and said he had found a problem on the network and made a huge front page story about it that went around the world. And then when we asked to see the machines, he said, "Oh no, I've locked them up so the FBI can look at them and you can't see them." So we couldn't see any of the evidence of this thing. And that is, of course, not what you do. And that didn't make any sense at all. I mean, the FBI couldn't care less if we get hacked in that way. I mean, we're not critical national infrastructure. We're not that important. It was all just nuts. And I had to battle that guy for several years to finally get rid of him. Anyway. So which detail is typically not important? Yep, and of course, we are now having a big issue about this. They're trying to ban Russian hardware, Russian antivirus, and Chinese hardware. So there is some interest now in blocking certain nations, but that's relatively new, and it's certainly not the first thing you think of. And it's not that clear how much it's going to help us anyway. That's a current issue of a controversy. Why? All right. And Juarez, good. All right, good. So I got those names. And get rid of this. All right. So let's go on to the next one here. So now you've got some kind of report, you have some kind of incident, you have some data. Now you got to find leads. Leads, there's a lot of facts you can have, but a lead is something that actually helps you, something that gives you actionable information that will help you find more useful information. So things like indicators of compromise, the names of people who are involved, like user accounts that are being used improperly. So now you've got to know to track down where has that user account been logging in and what has it been doing, things like that. So you got to have something relevant to the incident and something actionable that actually gives you some direction to move, to learn more, and enough detail to get you there. So you have to clean up the data, figure out how to use the lead to get the most benefit. So your intrusion detection system, of course, that's what it's for. In a perfect world, your intrusion detection system would respond with a lot of useful information, and it would never falsely tag innocent traffic. And then you'd have right there useful information. Yeah, the Equifax breach. Yeah, of course, a lot of these things. Oh, also the OPM breach. A lot of breaches made people really mad, and then you have to deal with it. And by the way, since we're on the topic, when China hacked Google, that created this whole world of instant response, because that was the first time they publicly admitted that China was hacking everybody and that advanced persistent threat actors are out there and everybody really has to repel them. Up till that time, everyone was just sort of hiding it and hoping they could pretend it wasn't there to avoid admitting it. So, sometimes people get mad and that provokes them to do something that may actually be beneficial, but you have to be careful when people are responding from anger. They can overreact. Anyway, so you got to look at the raw packets of your network traffic gaussian and check for other connections made by that host, because the infected host may connect out in other ways if the bad guy is using it, installing more stuff. Especially when you have humans and the data primarily comes from humans, you have to keep in your mind, this happens to me a lot. People often come to me with their problems. And it's in my mind, what if you're wrong about this? What if it's all in your mind? What if you're just being paranoid? How do I guide people to a better result, even if they probably don't want to admit what's really going on here? That's a big issue. Anyway, your automated systems, of course, make mistakes too. So you're trying to turn leads into indicators, and indicators are things you can use to really find out where people are going. So that's just like the exploit development is turning a denial of service into a remote shell. This is the process of improving leads. Turning leads into indicators is what you want to do. You have a bunch of evidence, then you pick out the relevant evidence, then you boil it down to something you can actually use to detect what's going on in the network. So property-based indicators are what you usually want. Registry keys, hashes, mutexes in the memory, files that are created, things like that. And mutexes are internal Windows handles used for inter-process communication. And a lot of malware creates mutexes so that other malicious software on the machine can detect that this machine is already infected. So once you find that, it's a very useful indicator of compromise. So you try to find them. There's two ways to do it. You can have less specific leads where several things that are innocent in themselves appear together, and that's an indication of compromise. Especially now, an increasing number of attackers have quit using malware because it's too easy to attack and find malware. They do living off the land. They have scripts that use legitimate Windows administration tools and Windows features that are already on the machine. And then you just have to look for a pattern of use of legitimate tools that indicates malicious activity, which is more difficult, but that's where it's going. So here's your life cycle. You get some kind of initial lead, then you now create some kind of indicators you can use to detect it. Then you scan your network and examine it to find out where those indicators are, and you find machines that are involved in the attack, and then you analyze them and you find more indicators of compromise from that, and you go around and around until you have reached a point where you think you understand enough of what happened, and then you publish your results. Of course, not to the world typically, but to your internal team so people know what's happening, and then you can begin to plan your remediation event when you kick all this badness out and patch all the holes it came in with. So your host-based indicators are things you can measure on one computer that tell you that it's infected. And so your ultimate goal is to decide this computer is part of the attack or it's not part of the attack. That's whether I have to spend any more time investigating this machine or not, because you have a whole network and you want to scan it and find a few machines that you can analyze in detail that you know are involved in the attack. So we're going to use malware samples from this book. Your textbook did. As I mentioned, this is Mandiant's malware analysis book, and we're using Mandiant's instant response book. They are the authoritative company that did all this. So it's these are the standard way to learn this stuff. So you can start with an MD5 hash. The MD5 hash if you have a file with this MD5, that's malware. This is what you typically have from an antivirus product or from VirusTotal. It's looking for that exact file. And if you have an exactly identical file, then obviously you've really got malware. The good thing about this is no false positives. It is essentially impossible that an innocent file would have the same MD5. In principle, it could happen, but in practice, you'll never see it. So you definitely got the exact piece of malware if you find that file. The problem is, if anything changes about the file, the hash is totally different. So this indicator will not survive any mutation. So there's portable executable headers. All Windows executable files are portable executable. They can end in exe, com, or dil, and they have a header which specifies what Windows libraries are used and what Windows API calls are used to make the software run. So you look at the header, you'll see information. And one thing that's in there is the time and date that it was compiled. So you might look at the file size and the compile date, and that might be a better indicator than, say, the MD5, because they might have different versions of the file with something that varies and changes it. So this might be a better way to detect it that will survive longer. Then you can try the DNS cache. If you know it is phoning home to some kind of malicious server, then you can look for that domain name here. And this is the server used by the malware from that other textbook. It's all fake malware that calls home to this server. And when it does, you can look, if this machine has been going to that server, that probably means it's infected. Or if it's running a service with this unusual name that the malware is using, or it has a certain file name and a header date and a file size, various things that might detect the file. If you have a series of somewhat vague descriptions like this, then you have a higher possibility of a false positive, but you're also more likely to detect the variations of the malware that might be out there. So you try to balance these things. You want to get enough information to detect the file, but you don't want to slow down your scanner. Snort, for example, has a format for writing rules, which is sort of confusing. And it is, in fact, very easy to write a snort rule that is too complicated to process. That's why the skill of writing snort rules is learning how to write ones that will not take too much processor time. If you burden a network scanner with a heavy process, it will start losing packets. So it's a big issue. The import table is the part I mentioned before in the header of an executable file in Windows that lists all the libraries that it uses. And legitimate software uses common predictable patterns of libraries. And so here's what this malware uses. It creates a service, it scans the registry and creates a key, then it makes an internet connection. And so, you have a series of library calls it makes. And you might find that that particular pattern of library calls is not present in legitimate software you're using. And that would be a nice way to detect malware, where any small change in the malware would probably not escape that detection. So you might, for the non-malicious IOCs, there are things people do that are not malware. For example, CCSF. This is handicapped accessibility. If you try to log into a Windows machine, you can press the Shift key 5 times or click a little clock-looking thing on the left, and that is how you open the accessibility page so you can log in without using a normal keyboard and mouse. And that is this CCSF. That means it has to launch as system because it launches before you have logged in. So there's no one else it can be, and system is the most powerful account. So if you replace CCSF with CMD, then when it tries to launch it, it'll give you a command prompt, and you can type in commands and execute them as system. You can also use this trick where you connect it to the debug handler in the registry, and then when it launches a debugger automatically, and you can make the debugger CMD. So these are ways to launch a command prompt before you log in, and that's a common way to get into a machine. This was the first hacking technique I ever learned back in Windows 2000. I got out of the lab and they didn't give me the administrator password, and you can reinstall from the install disk and press Alt F11 during installation and get a command prompt as system. So it gets you the same place. And if you can get a command prompt as system before you log in, you can add a new user or change a password from that screen. That's a way to get in. Yeah, and here's got a blog about hiding in plain sight. Yeah. And here's one. Okay, a lot of malware is related to Windows and Microsoft's abysmal response to security patches. Well, yeah, I don't know if it's fair to say Microsoft is abysmal, but I mean, Microsoft does take time to patch vulnerabilities, but I'm not as angry about it as I used to be. Anyway, Mac is now the predominant has the incentive for Mac OS related malware risen? Well, I think so. There's some malware on Macs, and there's definitely malware on Linux now. You're absolutely. However, most malware still targets Windows, but absolutely, you are correct. Now that people are using Macs more and people are using Linux servers more, and Linux has become more standardized, there's an increasing amount of malware that goes on Linux and Mac also. And one thing that happens here is they write platform-independent malware in languages like Java and infect machines. All those things have begun to happen, but most of it is still Windows-based malware on Windows endpoints. But you're absolutely right. There are other things too, like malware that escapes from virtual machines and infects the host and the other virtual machines. There are a lot of these things. And then, of course, there's malware on phones. And there's malware on phones that detects if it's in an emulator and doesn't run. So, I mean, yes, that's why most of what we're talking about here is the simple cases. But that's why you have to always be aware that there is hard stuff, especially if you get attacked by a military. Those people are really sophisticated, and they can really blast right past all your detection tools. That's why I met a guy who was in the KGB. And then he came to America and he said, I keep getting hacked. What can I do? And I said, there's nothing you can do. And he said, that's what I thought. They've got access to tools that will just blast through everything. And that's pretty much the case. I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the same thing as your physical safety, right? If you're walking down the street and if a military wants to kill you, you're toast, right? You can't, no guard's going to save you, no armor-proof car or anything. You know, they got weapons that can get you. Yeah, and in malware and IoT devices, yes. I mean, those are the emerging new threats. Exactly, absolutely. Anyway, so here you detect file replacement. If they actually replace this file with a different file, then you might look to see if it's the MD5 of CMD, or if it's compiled on the wrong date, or you might look to see if it's one of you might get the MD5 of the existing good file, and it might have two versions if you have two different versions of Windows. And if it has any other MD5 or a different date, then that indicates that that file has been altered, sort of thing you might do. Another thing you might do is, since there are different versions of CCSF and different versions of CMD, you can just see if it got too big, because CMD is bigger. So you just look to see if the file size is bigger than it should be. That's your indicator of compromise. Here you detect them changing the debugger key in the registry. This thing called image file execution options. If they've been putting CCSF in there, then this handicapped accessibility feature is launching a debugger, and that is not normal. That would be a clue. And so Mandiant has this open IOC format where you make this sort of tree-structured logical path to determine it. That's another way to write these down if you're feeding them into tools that speak open IOC, which I don't think is really all that common yet. And so anyway, you're trying to find if, here's another thing people do. There are, snort, for example, can be used to just look for a pattern of bytes in the network traffic. And that's very simple. That's also what Yara does, which we're going to use. So for that kind of thing, it works best on a simple protocol like DNS. DNS is very simple. You have queries and responses, and the queries just have a couple of flags, and then they just have the domain name right there. So you can just look for that pattern of bytes in a DNS traffic, which is on port 53 typically, and that would be a pretty clear indicator of compromise. So you have a very simple DNS pattern. There's a query name, a type, and a class. And so your domain name is split into labels. And so you have no periods. It uses so you have 18 characters for this, and then 3 characters for com. If you catch it in Wireshark, you'll see it here, practical malware analysis, and there's a binary 3 there, and then com. So you can look for that pattern of bytes, and here's how it looks in Snort. You have 18 characters, which are these 18 characters, then a binary 3, and then com, and then a null byte. So, or I guess, yeah, I think that's it. No, they actually look for this 18 to start. So this is a binary 18, hexadecimal 18. So this is the literal pattern. It has to have exactly that pattern of bytes. And if it does, on port 53, then that's a clue. That's a pretty good signature that's not too hard for the machine to process. So you can find these things with dynamic analysis. You run your malware and wait till it monitor the network, and then you found it. So you can, and you typically either let it phone home, but if you don't want to let the bad guy know that they've got you, then you make a fake network running. So they're not really getting to the real internet. They're just reaching a fake network. So you can see what happens. And then you'll see. Now you've got, now you've found a network indicator of compromise. So then you verify it. Try it on a couple other machines somehow. Make sure that your data does pick up the infection and that it does not happen on a clean system. So you're not going to waste your time pushing out something to thousands of machines and getting results that won't help you. All right. And so you got a life cycle. Let me take a look at open source software for Windows, a Splunk forwarder alternative. Well, I haven't tried setting up the forwarder. The typical open source software that's used instead of Splunk is Elk. You get Security Onion, or you can install it on any Linux version. It's Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana. And I wrote it all up on my old version of my CNIT 50 class, but that's what most people use. It's Elasticsearch if you want the open source stuff. And then you can do it all with open, but I'm not sure what they use for a forwarder. I'm sure it must exist, but I haven't got that far because that stuff is so hard to use that we never got more than the very basics working. But that's what a lot of people use. Good. Anyway, so you send an email. This guy opens Word document. That puts launches the second stage of the malware, and then it starts doing bad things. So you could look for the dropper. There's an appliance you can download called Bitnami. I didn't know Bitnami, but yeah, it's like Security Onion is the one I know. But yeah, there are various ones. Anyway, so your email scanner will record things like the MD5 hash of the attachment, but that's not very effective because any change would change the hash. So more effective would be looking in the prefetch directory for the malicious software running, and looking in the browser history for a DNS entry. You know, these are the sort of things that would be more general. So if you want to find it, you run this is what we do in the malware analysis class, dynamic analysis. You make a clean workstation, you run the malware, and then you watch to see what happened. And of course, this is how you check your indicators of compromise. All right. So another issue is when you do develop your scan to detect the indicators of compromise, it might be too burdensome. So you want to test and make sure that the resource consumption of your scanning process is not too high. Like, for example, if people try to image an entire hard disk over the network, that is really burdensome. So you would not want to do something like that unless you have to. And if you did it, you would have to be aware that you're going to significantly impair the performance of the network and of the machines involved while you're doing that. All right, so you resolve your internal leads. By the way, one thing that they implied here, but I should say, is you have to keep clear data logs of what you did, because you might well cause problems and even cause extra alerts and such. So make sure you write down everything you did, because what you did maybe need to be reviewed later. In fact, you might make a mistake and destroy evidence, and then you'll have to know what happened there. So, always write down everything you did. So people are telling you things, document them. When you're interviewing people, you have to understand that they're often emotional. They're often making mistakes. Sometimes they're even guilty and lying. So you have to learn how to interview people correctly. Let them talk, find out what they have to say. Don't criticize them or confront them. If you think what they're saying is wrong, you may very well not want to confront them or argue. You might want to just record it, but then be aware that I don't really trust everything I've got here. And there'll be a time when you might have to get other people involved, like human resources or something, or the supervisor. But, you have to, the first thing you have to do is get the facts. If you have external parties involved, like cloud services and such, then they're not required to tell you what happened. So, and if you're a private organization, you don't have any way to force them to do it unless you have a service level agreement with them. For example, if you find they're taking your data and putting it on a shared Google Drive, you would like Google to tell you what data they took and where did they send it, but Google won't tell you that, not unless you get a court order. So you can file lawsuits and subpoenas if there are discovery mechanisms, if you're suing the company for them doing something wrong. If you can involve copyright infringement, this is really useful. This is why a lot of people use copyright infringement inappropriately because the punishment is very clear. If you complain about anything and say, I own it, then people will usually just take it down with no questions asked, even when your claim is completely spurious, because that way they dodge legal liability. But anyway, and then another option is to involve law enforcement. If you can actually get them to care, and they have a lot of power, but they will only act if they regard it as a significant enough crime, and you can't turn them off once you've turned them on. So your legal counsel files a complaint. This can compel an organization to cough up information, and this happens all the time. It happens at the college. It happens everywhere. I once ran into an FBI agent at the college who was filing a document to get information about a student. It happens. And email providers and everybody else, your VPN providers and everybody else, they get these documents and they have to cough up what information they have. This is why a lot of VPNs like to advertise that they do not keep any logs. So when the government comes to them, they don't have it. And one law that they've tried to pass many times in America is to compel everybody to keep logs just so the law enforcement can see them, but they've never been able to pass that law yet. So, but another thing that has come out many times is many of these VPNs do in fact keep logs. And there was a scandal last week. There was a thing called Giggle, which was an app on phones, a social network for women only, where you had to prove you were a woman, and you took a picture to prove you were a woman, and they said, we won't keep the picture, but they did keep the picture, and they put it unsecured on a public server so other people could see it. So that's why, careful people that care about privacy are very concerned with what data do you have? Because if you have anything, you might foolishly lose it, or you might be compelled to hand it over in response to a court order. It would be much better if you don't keep any data that I might not want the whole world to see. Anyway, so when you report it to law enforcement, of course, now you've got a public record. Reporters can see it. It's probably going to hit the press and so on. Yeah, that's right. Snapchat. A lot of people thought Snapchat was private. Oh, and in Arab Spring, they used Twitter to plan protests, even though it's totally unencrypted. And that's why the United Arab Emirates and other nations required BlackBerry to put servers in their country so they could decrypt everything, because it's illegal to have an encrypted channel there. Yeah, good. You found something in your place to splunk forward? Good. Okay. That's why a lot of companies have defined retention policies. Yes. And the real reason why they have to have that, this came up with Enron. Enron was audited by Arthur Andersen. And when Arthur Andersen figured out that they were going to be investigated, they deleted all their files. And this went to being a huge scandal. You're not allowed to, if you think you're about to get sued, you're not allowed to delete the evidence. And so, however, if you have a policy of clearing your data after 1 year, you can do that. And that's why a lot of companies have that. But if you have a reasonable expectation that someone is about to file some kind of court request against you, you're not allowed to start destroying data, or you'll be in big trouble later. Anyway, so that's the issue here. There are some exceptions, though. If you're a regulated industry, there are certain rules where you must report them. If you have customers that are, I think, anywhere in America now, you must report certain kinds of breaches. And if you find child pornography on any system, you must immediately inform the Department of Justice. This is a high priority with the FBI, and you don't want to have it around. It is a felony to have it. It's a felony to see it. If you find any child pornography around, you have to immediately hand this over to the right government agency and get it out of your hands. It's radioactive. You don't want to have anything to do with that stuff. I've had students tell me, people bring in laptops, and I say, when you're fixing somebody's laptop, you don't look at the files. Not only is that unprofessional, but you don't want to see things that aren't your business. You'll just be opening a can of worms. That's why one of the big scandals was the Geek Squad at one of the stores. They were keeping copies of the personal files from the laptops and phones they fixed and trading around like pornography and stuff. And that is highly unprofessional, probably illegal, and involve you in a whole lot of bad things. Don't be doing that. Anyway, so you've got people putting your data on foreign sites. If it's outside the country, then of course you're pretty much toast. Nobody's going to get at that except federal law enforcement, unless you can have some kind of partnership with a local lawyer in that country. It has been done. I went to the Secret Service meeting with the High-Tech Crime Investigators Association, and I heard a big presentation how they were very proud of the partnership with people in Russia and other countries, and they were getting information and prosecuting them. And I made myself unpopular by saying, how do you really trust the statements made by law enforcement in those other countries? Do you really think that you can rely on it? And they did not like me bringing that issue up. But anyway, across nations, it's very difficult. All right, the law enforcement, of course, can force people to hand over data. The people will often respond much more quickly to them. And if they do bring a criminal action, it's often at no cost to your company. But if they decide that you're the bad guy, then you might be sorry you involved them. All right, and so if you're going to be prepared for law enforcement, then you have to keep good records, maintain chain of custody so you know you've been protecting the evidence or it won't be any good in court, and so on. You have to be much more professional about this. If you go to Drive Savers to recover data from damaged machines, they have a legal service there now. They will actually make official records and have an expert who will go testify in court. If you pay for that, you can have legally secure, official, high-quality investigations that can go to court of machines you take to them. So that's another option. You could outsource your forensic work to a third-party company of professionals. Anyway, and then there's a lot of public-private partnerships. This has been a big deal for the last 10 years, starting with InfraGard, which connects the FBI to companies. And this is often what you do to get involved with law enforcement agencies. You do want to get used to dealing with law enforcement and have somebody you know you can call with questions and such. I might be able to get another law enforcement guest speaker this semester. About time I'm going to start hunting up guest speakers. Anyway, so I got another Kahoot. You have to get over being afraid of law enforcement. They'll have to deal with them every now and then in the business. All right. MD5 hash detection by changing malware source code from if else to when while. Yes, absolutely. If you change anything, if you change the name of the author on the property sheet, that will do it. No, if you change any part of the code, the hash will change. That's why a hash is a very weak detection technique. The only good thing about hashes is it has a low false positive. But it's extremely easy to evade hash-based detection. All right. That might be all we're getting. I'll give it a few more seconds. All right. All right, I guess that's it. Okay, Tripwire has a false positive. So what's wrong with this lead? That's not a real lead. It's not a real attack. It just looks like one. This is the problem with Tripwire. Tripwire works with MD5 hashes, and it tells you if any file changed. But of course, a lot of files change, even in the ordinary process of running an operating system. So you have to tune it up to ignore all those. All right. All right, every program and every service in Windows is this kind of file. They're portable executable files, PE. All Windows EXEs are not the only kind of executable. Portable executable is the type of file that executes on Windows systems. All right, what's the network protocol that's easiest to find malicious activity? DNS is great. HTTPS is encrypted, so it's hard to tell what's going on, and the others aren't used that often. But DNS is fantastic. It tells you exactly what machine it came from and the domain name they were trying to reach. This is why a lot of people are getting very upset now that DNS is moving to DNS over HTTPS. That's the new secure thing, and it's great for your privacy, but it is means that network monitoring people are losing their simplest, easiest tool. So what is part of the PE header? Those are imports. Those are the Windows libraries it uses. All right. All right, Wilson. Oops. And Juarez. One twice. Okay. All right. All right. I'm going to stop this recording.